country over the last 15 months.
Okay, happy to take any questions.
Yep. On the inquiry, do you want that to be made public? And with such a matter, doesn't it risk exposing our security agencies, depending on, if that is made public and what we find out there?
Well, it should be made public and there should be transparency around it because it's without precedent. There is no way in the world that a Prime Minister would be kept in the dark for 10 days about an alleged terrorist plot that could have killed hundreds of Australians. Why was the Premier of New South Wales notified about it if there was a national security imperative to keep it from political leaders? It just doesn't add up. And if there are elements that need to be redacted, if they need to be kept secret for national security reasons, I'm sure that can be facilitated in the report. But it's the Prime Minister's argument again, and he's had a number of different positions, but this argument that somehow it's a breach of national security if he declares what date he was advised by the police, I mean that just doesn't wash, and no one should accept that at all. Andrew? Sorry, I'll come back in a second.
Mr. Dutton, who do you actually feel is responsible for not telling the Prime Minister? Does the buck stop with the Federal Police Commissioner and the ASIO Director General?
I think, to be honest, Andrew, the Prime Minister has the questions to answer here. I don't think there's any breakdown in the process. The New South Wales Police have either made a deliberate decision not to advise the Commonwealth so that the Prime Minister wasn't advised because they were worried he was going to leak the information. Beyond that, there's no other reasonable explanation. Again, I just can't understand how the Premier and the Prime Minister could go to the childcare centre, could go to the joint press conference, could have however many conversations over the course of the next 8-9 days, and the Premier doesn't say in passing, or the Prime Minister doesn't raise it with him. It doesn't pass the pub test, and I just think it's obvious the Prime Minister's not being honest here. He wasn't advised for 9 days. He tried to give Karl Stefanovic some view this morning that you shouldn't assume that he wasn't advised. Well, that's a new line again, and I just think we need somebody with honesty and integrity to have a look at the process, and then we can work out from there what happened.
Yeah. Why are you calling this inquiry before you've requested a briefing from ASIO and the AFP? Don't you think some of these questions could be answered by the authorities?
Well, I don't think it's the place of ASIO or the Australian Federal Police to advise me why the Prime Minister wasn't advised for 9 days. That's not their job. We'll come back. Yep, Mark.
So isn't that though what you're doing in essence? You're asking for resources that would otherwise be devoted towards investigating this incident to be diverted for political reasons to answer to an independent inquirer. Isn't that the timing for that is wrong, is it not? Shouldn't we be focused on the investigation itself?
I just don't think, Mark, it distracts from resources at all. I think it's obvious that the Prime Minister wasn't notified, and the question is why. I don't think that distracts hours of human resource away from investigations. I think it's obvious that the Prime Minister was kept in the dark. The question is why. Now, was it a political reason? Did Mark Dreyfus know? Was the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff informed? Did the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor get a briefing? Look, my recollection in government was that the Federal Police would call up and speak to advisors or my Chief of Staff or me as Minister with raw intelligence because they were worried probably about covering their own backsides if an event happened and the Minister hadn't been notified. And how can we conceive of a position where the Prime Minister of our country is not aware of a planned mass terrorist attack that could have resulted in a 40-metre blast zone and hundreds of people losing their lives? I think they're reasonable questions, not politically based. This is a matter of national security and it can't be repeated. And I'm not aware of any precedent for it before. I'll work my way across. Charles?
Mr Dutton, have you been offered a briefing by our intelligence agencies or the government, and if so, have you taken up that offer?
Well, Charles, a couple of points. As I said the other day, I've spoken by text with the Director General of ASIO. I think James has had a briefing in relation to the matter. I've had a number of briefings from the AFP Commissioner and from the Director General of ASIO in relation to the anti-Semitic activity, and obviously there's information that's publicly available, which is sort of the extent of what you get in some of these briefings anyway. So I haven't had a briefing in relation to this event. I will do in course when there's further information available, but I've worked in this space very closely for a long period of time. I understand the processes that are in place, which is what amazes me about the lack of engagement from the Prime Minister. When we had the attempt to bring down that A380, we were constantly engaged with the agencies about what was happening during the course of that operation, during the course of the covert elements of that operation, and it's inconceivable in this circumstance, unless they were worried that the Prime Minister or his office were going to leak the information which would have compromised the covert nature of it, or the covert element of it. It's inconceivable as to why else the Prime Minister wouldn't have been briefed, and he doesn't seem to be concerned by that. So we'll come across it.
Has anyone actually, do you have actually any evidence that the agencies were worried about leaks, or is that just something that you're suggesting?
I'm not going to comment on discussions I've had with individuals out of agencies, and people can draw their own conclusions based on their own experiences, but there's nothing else that adds up as to why the Prime Minister would be kept in the dark for 9 days when the authorities saw fit to brief the Premier, and he was open and honest about the fact that he had been briefed on the 20th of January. Yes,
those conversations you'd had with the Director General, did you explicitly ask him whether he had told?
I'm not going into the conversation.
Mr. Dutton,
Patricia? Yeah.
Thank you, it's my turn. Mr. Dutton, just on that, obviously you have many sources in all of these agencies, having been Home Affairs Minister. Are you saying people have been talking to you and suggesting that there's a fear that the Prime Minister or his office leaks information?
Patricia, I'm saying that there should be an independent inquiry because...
Is it sourced? Because obviously, some of the most important people in these agencies. Is it sourced or is it a hunch?
We'll try and give everyone a question. So I've answered the question. I think we should have an independent inquiry, and I think there should be transparency about why the Prime Minister was willingly or not kept in the dark for 9 days. David?
Mr. Dutton, I want to go back to Andrew Tillett's question about whether there are questions for the AFP or ASIO in their decisions about who they brief. Because when you answered his question, you said you didn't think there was any breakdown in the process. But how can you know that? Because you're calling for an inquiry. If you don't think there was a breakdown in the process, why call for the inquiry? Surely in this whole question, there are some questions to be answered by the AFP about their decisions on who they briefed and when.
Well, we'll ask questions at Senate estimates and go through that process. And obviously, somebody having a look at the whole situation will look at the roles of everyone. My job is...
should be looked at.
Well, if there is an independent investigation, the process of the Prime Minister being briefed by the agency, whether it's Australian Federal Police, ACIC or ASIO or ASD or whoever it might be, then you would expect for questions to be asked about, was the Prime Minister briefed, why not, what was the logic to it, and maybe there are discussions with the PMO, as I say, in terms of brief the advisor but the PM doesn't need to know. Maybe there's a perfectly legitimate reason that so far has escaped all of us collectively as to why the Prime Minister was in the dark for 9 days. And so I think they're reasonable questions that the Prime Minister can answer, and really only the Prime Minister. But the first step is for an inquiry to start, and that's what I would encourage.
Do you suggest that there's been? Are you suggesting that there has been any ill outcome or unintended consequence or dereliction of duty, if it is indeed the case that the Prime Minister did not know over 10 days? Would anything have been different, in your view, if it were established?
Well, look, it's a hard question. It's a hard question to answer in the sense that you're not there receiving the information and understanding the dynamics of the operation. But as I said before, when I was Home Affairs Minister, and I'm sure it's the case for Tony Burke now, I mean, we carried secure communications with us 24/7, wherever we were in the world. And the idea of that was that you were able to be contacted for an NSC meeting to be convened immediately if there was a terrorist attack or whatever incident may have occurred. There are countless reasons why the Prime Minister should be involved in a discussion. The deployment of assets from the Commonwealth, the involvement of specialist services and other aspects of the Commonwealth's assets that they could bring to bear in an investigation. It just again, it doesn't pass the pub test that the Premier of New South Wales knew about it on the 20th and never raised it, or a word was never spoken about it for 9 days in his communications with the Prime Minister. I mean, what else was more important to talk about? Yes, mate.
Please, on the federal election, will you have a campaign plane available for journalists during the course of the campaign, and will you be available to journalists from the Canberra Press Gallery as a matter of transparency throughout the campaign each day?
Did you say plane or plan?
Plane plus.
Yes. How big a plane would you like?
That I'll leave up to you.
Right. All right. Well, we can negotiate menus, appointments. The interior.
To question you in Canberra.
Well,
that's why I'm asking the question.
I think.
Will you be available to the Canberra Press Gallery each day as a matter of participating in democracy and respecting the fourth estate?
I think one of the most exciting aspects of the campaign is that we're going to pull you all out of Canberra, and we're going to move out of this bubble, and we're going to go and talk to real families, and we're going to go and talk to the constituents who are telling me that they are being crushed at the moment by the cost of living crisis that the Prime Minister has created. And I know that sometimes there's an opportunity. I was up at Queanbeyan the other day. I think only Andrew and Riles, were you there?
That was Goulburn.
In Goulburn, with just the two of you? Sarah was there. There were three of you. You were all welcome. I think we put it out. We'll be there with bells on and talking to you. I wouldn't get too excited with that Canberra story. I'm very happy to take questions, to speak with you regularly, as I do sometimes off the record as well, and have a pretty good relationship with many of you. So I encourage you more and more to do that. But to speak to those people during the campaign, I think it's going to be a great thing.
On the Middle East, so you've been a big supporter of Israel. You've spoken about not wanting to see Hamas regain control of Gaza. We heard President Trump's plan yesterday under a Dutton government. Would you be interested in seeing Australian peacekeepers potentially on the ground in Gaza to help maintain peace, rebuild, stop Hamas gaining strength?
Well, I think the White House has issued a statement, as I understand it, saying that the Americans aren't necessarily talking about boots on the ground, which I think is an important point to make. Look, I made some comments this morning on Ben Fordham's program in relation to this. I just think we have to understand the dynamic. As we saw, the President was moving markets before the inauguration. The President has a very different approach than his predecessors in my memory, and he has a business approach. He has been a negotiator, he's been a deal maker his entire life, and it's created incredible success, obviously in terms of his own finances and his success in business. And that's the model that he's applied, both in the 45th presidency and obviously now in the 47th as well. We had a very good relationship with the Trump first administration. We'll have a great relationship with the Trump Mark II after the election, and we'll work with them very closely. I think the point the President was making, which is a point all of us, I'm sure, would want to emphasise, is that we want peace in the Middle East. We want Palestinians and Gazans to live in peace. We want their kids to be able to go to school, to do it freely. We want there to be jobs, there to be industry, and for people to be able to lead their lives in the way that they want. And for there to be an absence of the threat to Israel and the threat to others in the region. Iran is still lurking, obviously, with ill intent, and the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia and others, all of that continues to advance. So there are many aspects to the dynamic of what you're seeing in the Middle East at the moment. But in terms of the President's statements yesterday and what can be seen, I think the first point is that we want to see more hostages released. When you see the vision of those young girls coming out from that tunnel network, having been in there for months with listed terrorist organisation members. It's horrifying to think what they would have gone through, and thank goodness they're out now. So hopefully more people can be released, and if that is part of the work that the Trump administration is doing, which of course it is, then that's fantastic work. And whatever leverage can be applied to bring people out of a hostage situation back to their families, I think is a good thing. And if we can see a plan which has peace and stability restored to the region, then would I support that? Yes, of course I would.
Mr. Dutton, I have a couple of questions. I'm just going to go back on the ASIO.
Just one, Andrew, and then we'll keep going.
Okay.
But unless you want to restrict your other colleagues.
Oh, bless you then. Okay.
Well, to ask two. I mean, if they're two good questions, you should go.
Two good ones.
Yeah.
The first one is just trying to clarify your answer to Mr. Tillett and Mr. Crowe. Is it your understanding that ASIO and AFP were told in a timely fashion about the caravan incident? And secondly, just on Trump, do you think that resettling Palestinians and effectively ending Gaza as a place for Palestinians is consistent with the coalition's policy when it comes to two-state solution?
Well, on the first question, that's a question for the Prime Minister, really, isn't it? In terms of in terms of what the agencies knew and when, that's a question for the Prime Minister to answer. In relation to the second question, again, first priority is to get hostages out. Second, to make sure that whatever peace can prevail should be supported from every person, every nation of goodwill. And in relation to the actions of the Americans, I don't believe that the Americans have any intent to act outside of international law. I don't think the president, from what I've seen, is talking about forcibly moving people, or I would wait to see the detail of what is released as the discussions continue on, not just with the Israelis, but obviously with the near neighbours, Jordan and Egypt and others, in relation to what role they can play. And I suspect President Trump rightly has an expectation that not just America, but that other countries will contribute to the reconstruction so that people can get their lives back, and hopefully Hamas can be crushed, similarly with Hezbollah, because if that's the case, people in Lebanon have a chance of peace and freedom and stability in their lives, which is exactly what we want to see for the Palestinians, and obviously the removal of that threat to the Israelis as well.
Mr. Dunn, do you still support a two-state solution?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can I follow up then?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Just in terms then of the coalition's policy moving forward, would you see your government recognising West Jerusalem again as the capital of Israel?
Well, no, we have no proposals to make any changes to any settings that we've got at the moment. So in relation to the broader issue, I think let's wait and see what plan is proposed, what negotiations take place. And look, I think the other thing that we've got to recognise is that if we do want a better life for Palestinians, we have to accept that here we are in 2025, nothing to this point, not the great work that Tony Blair did or that Bill Clinton did or that Bush 43 and 41 sought to do, and before that has worked. And so let's give every chance to every option that's put forward to give it consideration. Is that going to be the way to help those Palestinian kids? Let's see. Let's see. David? Yeah.
With the desire to see more hostages released, how do you think the idea of the US taking ownership of Gaza is going to encourage Hamas to release more hostages, to stick to the ceasefire plan?
Well, David, I think when you look at the comments of President Trump after November, when he said that he wanted hostages released by the time of his inauguration, it was a pretty bold statement at that time, and I think a lot of people wrote up that his remarks about the retaliatory action or the action that he would take if hostages hadn't been released, people were scornful of those comments and dismissive of them. As it turns out, hostages were released on the eve of his inauguration, and clearly the actions, whatever he had put in place behind the scenes through his envoy to Israel and to Hamas and to others with influence, the Kuwaitis, whoever, I mean, it's obviously had an impact. And all I hope now is that whatever's happening behind the scenes that we're all, not privy to, is going to result in those people, more of those people, particularly young women and girls, being released from from those caves.
Yes,
mate.
You've been accusing Labor of having a secret 2035 target.
I see.
But isn't it the case that you'll have to sign Australia up to a 2035 target if you win the election? And if so, why can't you tell us what it is?
Well, that's not the only thing that Labor Party's accused me of course. There are many things that I stand accused of from the Labor Party, so I'd put it in that context. Our judgment is very clear, and we've been very specific in relation to it. We have a target for net zero by 2050. We support renewables in the system, very important point to make, often overlooked by our critics. We support, though, a firming up of that unreliable power, of the part-time power, by reliable power. Now, green hydrogen is not a reality. Investment is backing out of that at 1 million miles an hour, both commercial and government investment. So let's be realistic about the government's plan for 2030 and 2035 and beyond. It's based on a significant element of green hydrogen, which is not commercially viable. It's not. It's not.
You'll have to sign Australia up to one, won't you, if you win?
The government's policy on green hydrogen is not scalable, and it's not safe to transport at the moment in the way that they're proposing. So that, I think, is important to point out in terms of the likelihood of achieving targets. Now, we'll sign up to targets that we believe are in our country's best interests. I do believe that as we get toward 2050, particularly with nuclear coming in 2035, that will allow us a step change, which has been the experience in other countries, which is why many people on the left and many Greens around the world are supportive of nuclear power, because it's zero emissions and it provides the base load required to firm up the renewables in the system. And if you don't like fossil fuels, and green hydrogen is not a reality, and the battery technology's not as far as advanced as you would want, then I think you're starting to run out of options, which is why Labor's negotiating to extend the life of coal-fired power stations at the moment. And the point that I've made in relation to 2035, to your question, is that we don't have the capacity to model in opposition. The government has a lot of modelling, and you would have expected them to have released their detail of their 2035 target by February. They've chosen not to do that because they don't want to tell Australians about their secret plan, which will jack up the cost of electricity. Labor's 2035 plan has been kept from the Australian public, like the nature positive laws, because it's going to jack up the price of electricity. Electricity is already up by over 30% under this government, and Australian families can't afford more price rises under Labor. And that's why the Prime Minister and Chris Bowen are keeping that detail, which they have, from the Australian people. We're in opposition, and
You can't get someone independent to model it for you?
I think I've answered that question. Who hasn't answered? Down the back. Yep. Sorry, mate.
Announcement. So you've been critical of the Prime Minister, obviously, for not finding out about this caravan incident. But did Chris Minns make a mistake by not telling him? Because the Premier seems to be getting off scot-free in this.
Well, mate, again, I think these questions should be asked of Premier Minns. And I think Premier Minns did exactly what his predecessors and what the Prime Minister's predecessors have done, and that is they've said that, today I was advised by the AFP, or yesterday or last week I was given a briefing in relation to what's a very serious matter. If there's a covert operation underway, then in the briefing the Commissioner or the Director-General says, look, Minister, PM, there's an operation underway at the moment. We don't want to say anything publicly, so we'll let you know when you can make a statement. All of that is just normal practice. What's happened here is completely and utterly out of sync with what has happened before. And yes, I think Premier Minns, firstly, was just being honest and transparent with the people of New South Wales, which are not attributes you could attribute to the Prime Minister in this matter. And I think it's reasonable to ask him, well, in your conversations, you didn't say to the Prime Minister when you visited the childcare centre which had been attacked, an act of anti-Semitism that had taken place there, you didn't say on the sidelines, have you heard any more about this matter, or how do you think the police are going, or, it sounds really bad, this briefing I've just had. Nothing, like just radio silence for 9 days. It doesn't stack up, and I think that's the problem.
Should the Premier, though, have volunteered that information?
Well, not if he was advised not to, but that's a question that the Premier can answer. If he knew about it and he didn't raise it with the Prime Minister, well, presumably he's either thinking that this is not an issue worth discussing, but it's an alleged terror attack of significant scale, so you'd think it would jump onto the conversation list. Or he's been given advice, don't tell the Prime Minister for whatever reasons. And again, they're questions that Mr Minns could answer, or that the Prime Minister, or hopefully an independent analyst who could look at this objectively and decide from there. Phil?
Can I just ask you a question about the election?
Yes, mate.
Different topic. Just about the sort of current state of play. The bookies have got you at much shorter odds than Labor to win the election. There's been 2 polls in 2 months, which shows more voters expect you to form government next election than Anthony Albanese. Are you worried that you're going to lose your underdog status, and do you still think you're the underdog going to the election?
Well, Phil, as you know, we have an enormous job between now and the election. I think we can win the election because of a number of reasons. One is that I think we've demonstrated to the Australian public over the last 2.5 years that we have been a united team. We look like a credible alternative government. We've put pressure on a bad government. We've come up with policies, and we've worked very hard over the course of the last 2.5 years to put the policies together, and we'll release those as we get closer to the election. Second point is that a first-term government hasn't lost since 1931, and the unions will unleash millions of dollars of spending. The CFMEU, despite what they say, will put money into third-party campaigns, and it'll be tough. So are we the underdog in this campaign? Absolutely we are. But I want to win this election because I want to help families. I want to help small businesses. 27,000 small businesses have closed over the course of the last couple of years. Behind every story, there's a family who have lost their home or lost their savings. Employees who have now had to find work elsewhere. It's a bad time for our country economically and for those families, and I do want to get our country back on track, and that's the reason we'll be working hard every day up to the election. And as for the bookies, I haven't seen the odds, so maybe you can put $1, not each way, but put $1 on for me, and we can split it at the end.
Just on the floods, Mr Dutton, the Prime Minister's in North Queensland today. He'll miss question time. Is that fair enough, and do you plan to visit the flood zone as well?
Look, I think it's right for the Prime Minister to visit. It's always difficult to know, particularly when the waters haven't receded or people are still right in the thick of it. I made a decision not to go because I just think the emergency workers are still on the ground. People are still dealing with the inundation, and so.
To go with him today?
No, and that's his decision. That's fine. So look, yes, I think it's appropriate for the Prime Minister to go. It's just a question of your timing, and he's made the judgment that now is the time to go. My judgment is probably a bit later, and I've liaised with Phil Thompson on that basis, and that's his advice to me as well. And I'll continue my discussions with the Queensland government as well. But I just made the point in question time. I'll make it again here. We'll provide every support to the government for assistance that's being offered to people in the region. And I do hope that some of the roads are able to be built back better, because all of us living in capital cities wouldn't tolerate that sort of isolation and markets being cut off, trucks being stranded on the side of the road in much lesser rain events than what we've seen, let alone the devastation that's been caused by this one.
Mr Dutton?
Yeah.
Yes, mate. Can I ask you on your plans on the public service, please? Yeah. If you had become Prime Minister, how many public servants from the Department of PM&C do you think should be cut, could be cut? And can you give us some clarity exactly on how many of the 36,000 new public servants under this government you would look to cut, or hiring freeze? There's been a range of responses from different shadow ministers when asked this question.
Well, we'll make announcements in relation to our policies in due course, but I do note that with the 36,000 additional, that brings the public service up to over 200,000. Now that's much higher than in the Rudd-Gillard years. It obviously adds significantly, and I just don't find any Australians who say that it's easier to deal with the government as a result of employing 36,000 more public servants.
What about veterans, Mr Dutton? What about veterans who had to wait 2 years in many cases to receive their benefits, a year to get on the list to be considered, and then a year to have their claims processed? This is for crucial medicines that they were eligible for as soldiers. They then wait 2 years. There was a $6 billion backlog there. Are those the public servants that you'd cut? Presumably not.
No, and I've been clear about that in my statements. We're not cutting frontline positions. I want more money going to frontline services. I want more money going to health and education. I want to make sure that we can get the GPs into areas at the moment where they're not practicing. They're small businesses that have been crushed by the costs of running a practice, and it's why we've made announcements in relation to putting more money into GP training. I want more. Well, GPs access money that otherwise, in a finite budget, can be spent on public servants, or it can be spent on providing support through Medicare item numbers to make it more attractive to get GPs into regions. So,
Mr. Dutton, or would it be a hiring
sorry, I'll
freeze?
just deal with this question. Sorry, mate.
Would you offer redundancies, Mr. Dutton, or would it be a hiring freeze?
I'm happy to make the announcement at the time, but I've been clear. We're not having 36,000 additional public servants in Canberra. We're not.
Will Australians have those costings before the election?
Of course they will.
Mr. Dutton, because that wasn't clear on Sunday.
Jason, last one. Yep.
Would you be prepared to make a commitment to limit spending on consultants?
Well, we've said clearly that we will cut back on wasteful spending, and if there is wasteful spending taking place, then it should be cut, and that's what's going to get our economy back on track. It's what's going to allow us to pay for the services in the NDIS, in defence, in veterans, and many other portfolios that people expect. And there's no sense pretending that you can continue to jack up the government expenditure, to give people tax cuts that they desire, to have a downward pressure on inflation. I want to get inflation down, and to get inflation down, which is how we get interest rates down, but how we get the other cost pressures down as well. It's food that's up by 12%. It's rents that are up by over 17%. All of that is as a result of the inflation that's in the economy at the moment. And if we want to bring downward pressure on all of those costs, as the Reserve Bank Governor points out, the government has to stop spending money at the rate it is at the moment. And Australians aren't stupid. They're not falling for this, Jim Chalmers' smoke and mirrors trick. I want to manage the economy successfully, which is what my predecessors have done, and as Assistant Treasurer to Peter Costello and working closely obviously in the Howard government, we were able to clean up Labor's mess when Hawke and Keating left, and we will clean up Labor's mess again. We'll get our economy and our country back on track. If we do that, we can support families and we can see the economy grow again and help those families who are really under pressure because of the Albanese cost of living crisis at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.